Hello, soldiers. Welcome to another episode of Soul Mission, where we believe that each of us has a profound purpose waiting to be unlocked. I'm your host, Ayah Daniel Rashid, and if you've not done so already, go ahead and give Mission of the Soul a follow on Instagram to keep up with our soulful journey. Today, we are absolutely honoured to introduce our special guest with an incredible story. Now, this guest has one of the most interesting and captivating intellects that I've encountered. I mean, he's got so much knowledge on the philosophical realm. They've dedicated themselves to help guiding others through navigating the intricacies of existence and exploring the philosophical depths of life. So get ready to be absolutely inspired as we embark on this journey to uncover their wisdom in self-improvement and unravel the many facets of life. So as we always start every episode of Soul Mission, empower your soul and ignite your mission. Your journey starts now. Welcome, Justin, to the Soul Mission podcast.
Thank you so much, Ayah. I'm grateful to be here. I'm also grateful for what you're doing, the show that you're doing, and bringing people on and having these kind of conversations. So I wanted to acknowledge that and offer my gratitude to you for what you do. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And as a caveat to the audience, that was a beautiful, glowing review of my whatever it is I do. But I'll say to the audience as a caveat that what I say and offer is basically I'm transmitting ideas from other people. My depth of knowledge on this is, shallow, sometimes a little, maybe ankle deep, but, it's not, my depth is not important. It's just that I'll convey ideas. And if anybody catches anything in this conversation and they want to know more, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I have links and resources for the people who actually put a lot of thought into these ideas that I'm going to present, people who are truly fortunate in their intellectual capacity. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out as a caveat.
Definitely amazing. I think when we last spoke, all of the books and the people that you recommended that I looked into, also interesting. I mean, we spoke about the ontological argument, the teleological argument. How did you start by getting into that?
Sure. And I'd say I'm no different than most people in that I have this curiosity. I seem to exist. I seem to occupy space in the world, and I seem to relate with the world and others like myself who are in the world. And that curiosity of those relations and interactions has taken me on a journey from teenage years till now. I'm in my mid-50s. I'm 54. So, and the characters that I meet on that journey of curiosity and exploration have opened up new lenses or new perspectives for me to examine information. And I think that is a key to having, I won't call it wisdom, but just having the tools on board to really navigate life experience, navigate what can be challenging, but also even exploring what is beautiful and what is wonderful about life, and really deepening that appreciation and connection with those ideas and phenomenology of what's going on when we interact with the world in either a beautiful way or in a way that's very challenging to us. So to open up that intro a little more and say, well, what have I discovered? What have I come across that inspires me or I find deeply interesting? And I'll cut to the chase and say that when it comes to the ultimate nature of reality or what's going on beyond our graspability, our senses and so forth, I've lost a lot of interest in that. I really am not too concerned about any ultimate, some would call it a truth or knowing or understanding, any of that. And I've altered my focus to be involved with that which I have more apprehension and capability of understanding. So the things that we would consider to be more mundane in life, like again, just relating with the people in the world or the world, in events in the world, and that has helped tremendously in terms of those big, deep existential questions. It's all a wonderful curiosity, and I entertain certain ideas, but I just sort of cut off, again, you mentioned ontology, I kind of cut off a level that I just say, this is the speculation level below here, and then above the speculation level is what we have access to. It's what we understand. So below that speculation level are things that theology works with, and the religions of the world works with, and deeper spirituality works with. And again, I'm not cutting it off. It's just that I take a position that there was in middle Christianity and in the it might have been the scholastic age. They called it apophasis. I think we talked about that.
Yes,
where
we did.
Apophatics. It's in Kabbalism and things like that. It shows up maybe in Sufism a little bit. It revolves around the idea. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
basically to say that in Christian theology, I'll use that as the example, it's just to say I am trying to understand God. And the cataphatic will say, well, God is an anthropomorphic creature that created all of life. It's a man, and it's all these attributes, these things that we can characterize it. And the apophatic will say, well, no, I have no idea. It's ineffable. I cannot have access to that. And therefore, I can only know when I'm in communion with something that is divine to me, and I know when I'm in the presence of it. So I take that out of theology, and I just apply that to, again, that line, that dividing line of the layers of ontology, of beingness, of what it's like to be. And I just become apophatic at that point, or a very, very healthy skeptic, and say, I'll ask questions, but I really will never know. I will never, ever know, and that's fine. I'm at peace with that. And I think that saves, again, the trouble of torturing yourself, of trying to understand your relationship with that which you don't have access with. Now, when people go into, let's say, mindfulness practices or psychedelic experiences, and they have what they consider to be a breakthrough, and they feel non-dual, or they experience a unity or a oneness, which you see in a lot of anecdotes of psychedelic experience or meditation, that's neat. That's great. Maybe that's a glimpse. Maybe we're chasing shadows of what's going on, and that's interesting because it's part of a greater picture of the human experience, which is the mythos. It is the stories we tell to understand the ridiculous and absurd nature of our existence. If we get really, heady about it and say, oh my God, with these tiny insignificant things, and there's this whole universe, and it can be frustrating.
When I was doing my kind of research on ontology, I know you said that we kind of stopped there, but that's about the study of existence. Is that correct? Of just like what
beingness, that kind of thing.
Beingness and things like that. Could that link to mindfulness in any kind of way? Is it just being a sense of being and knowing, or does it link to existentialism as well and that kind of argument?
Well, existentialism, as lensed through the mid-20th century French existentialist, was, and I think it was Sartre, depending on how you say his name, that existence precedes essence, that there is a beingness. So if I were to have amnesia all of a sudden, but my body functioned and continued to function, but I wasn't able to communicate or think or anything like that, then I'm a being, and I'm a tabula rasa. I have nothing going on, no reporting, no self-awareness, all these things. They say that fundamentally is the existence, and kind of in a way that's, and Buddhists might roll their eyes if I say this, but it's kind of what the no self is. It's that, where is the locus of our selfness? There's a beingness, there's this fleshy me, this person that you see. But also there is the identity, there is the selfhood, there's the selfness that exists. And when one goes into that kind of non-dual state, all of that selfness dissolves. That's the sort of ego dissolution, or in psychedelics, it's ego death, where you're no longer an individuated agent. You're no longer an agential entity. You are just in a being state. And I've never gotten there. I've gotten very, very close, where it's such a relief not to be me anymore. And I'm just I used to meditate a lot. And I'd get into this headspace or whatever space where I was aware that I existed, but there was really nothing else there. It was just this nice quietness and non sort of whatever interactiveness that was going on. But I wouldn't say it was non-dual, and I've had bliss out experience in meditation, but that, I don't know what that was. But anyway, it was just one or two times. But I would say that that's what people are finding when they get into people who really apply themselves to meditation practices and mindfulness practices. When they reach that place, if that's what you could call it, that state maybe, that's what's going on, is that the executive ego shuts down. There's no longer a narrative, trying to think of the word, sense-making part of ourselves that's constantly wanting to know what's going on in the environment.
That's so interesting. I love the concept of executive ego, and I want to delve into ego death a bit more, because I know that is obviously a thing that if you do take psychedelics or ayahuasca, and that's meant to be like a main part of it, is the ego death. What you said, that you had kind of reached that point. That's obviously a point that so many people want to reach. We're really intrigued by. How did you get there?
Yeah, so the psychedelic route is very severe, and I think it can be deeply upsetting for a lot of people, especially if you strongly identify with yourself. If you have a really strong construction of your persona, your character that you are, it can be terrifying. It can absolutely, because it is essentially a simulation of a death. None of us know what it's like to die. So I mean, take it with a grain of salt. But I think when we're in a meditative state, the practice that I did, it would take me about an hour or so just to get into space. It took me that long to get my mind to shut up. And I am like ADHD or whatever. I was
Mm.
diagnosed with dyslexia or ADD or whatever it was back in the day. So it takes me a really long time to
Yeah.
just to bring it down and hush. But again, after about an hour, I'd stop all the narrative and and I would use music. I'm so bad. I'm so like hyperactive that I couldn't do the, look at the candle and just
Yeah,
breathe.
yeah, yeah.
Notice,
I find that
notice,
really hard to do as well.
no, I can't do that. What I do is I distract, and I guess they could call it the monkey brain, the chatter brain, with beautiful soundscapes,
Okay.
and do that. And in fact, I went so far as to start designing my own soundscapes with
It's
synthesizers and
amazing.
things, just to help,
Yeah.
and hit that note or that set of sounds that I want. Anywho, just to go and I would do that. I probably meditated 3 or 4 hours a week, and I would just practice, and get down to where I just get into that. And it's kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like a letting go, and it's the narration stops, the imaginal, interior, voice and conversation just fades away, and there is just some little semblance of meanness there. And if I think about it for a second, it's gone, and I'm like, shoot, but I can usually go back to it. And so, so you just have to, when you recognize that you're slipping into that space, that I call it the landscape of inner awareness was my little term for it. It's this terrain that you occupy, I guess, the mental terrain, and it's just so relieving because it's like you don't have to be you for a while. You don't have to be all of the things that are you. It's just you're occupying a space that is refreshing.
And can you bring that back into life, or is that just when you're in a really deep meditative state, or does that come back to you?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're bringing that up because I think that it is possible for us, and it may take a months or years of doing, maybe 30 minutes a week or an hour a week, just to get familiar with what you're setting a baseline for yourself and saying, okay, I recognize this now. I recognize the silence. I recognize the chatterbrain in my head is no longer there. It's gone, and it's just pure quiet. Or if you have soundscapes playing or drone or whatever, that's all there is. That's all that's going on. And then if you recognize that, then when you go into life and you take a walk in the forest, for me, it was anything mundane. If I was doing a mindless task, like washing dishes, I used to be a chef, and if I had a stressful night cooking, I'd go to the dish section, the dishwashing area, and I'd wash dishes with the dishwashers, and I would it's like wax on, wax off.
Yeah.
It's a repetitive task, and you could shut that part of your brain down that has to think, and then you just get into it's like a flow state, you just get into this flow. And when you do that, it's close to it, but you still have a lot of visual and auditory, audible distractions going on and things like that. So it's not quite that, but I'd say yes, if you do want to pursue that kind of mindfulness practice, that it shows up in your daily life. It doesn't show up when you're driving. It doesn't show up when you're interacting with somebody, especially if you have a job and you have to really, be present and all that kind of stuff. But again, if you take yourself out into nature, you're out there, just very minimal requirement for you to be processing reality, as it were, or processing all the stimuli that are coming at you. So, yeah, I'd say it is definitely something that can be conveyed into waking life. In fact, they have walking meditations that you can do. I've done them before, and it's okay. I don't go that deep, but
Is that just walking in like a forest, or is it like barefoot?
Yes. Yes. And maybe just setting that intention to say, I'm stripping away the layers of selfness. I'm stripping away the egoic layers and just, and letting myself unfold in a different way into the environment. And I think, again, just being in a quiet, low stress environment, again, a walk in the woods is probably or a prairie or whatever environment you have available to you. I live about 3 miles from the ocean.
They say that people that live near the ocean are 20% more happier, or some kind of crazy statistic like that. It's healing.
Believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's probably lithium salts in the spray of the air, which might help mellow us out a little. But
So
beyond
true.
that, it is who doesn't like the sound of a gentle surf or the water lapping up on the shore? And the other thing is, people who are around you are usually at their best. They're in recreation mode, and they're not competing or yelling or doing all these things. So normally people are on their good behavior at the beach. So even if you have people around you on the beach, they're having fun. They're relaxing. They're trying to, have a nice experience along with you. So
yeah, that's so true. No one's stressed out at the beach.
You don't go to the beach to get into road rage. Once in a while, you might get like space rage, like, oh, I picked this spot. Come on, move away from those people. And
so funny. That's why so many people leave the city and they just go, I'm going to go and get a little country house on the beach.
Right.
It's amazing. I remember when we last spoke, I think you brought up something called, and I found it really interesting, your emotional immune system, which I found really interesting 'cause when you previously mentioned that when things come at us at life, we have to kind of just be like a slate and just like let things come and just be like that being, but not internalize everything. But how can kind of people in their lives understand or use kind of the teleological approach, which I kind of delve into, to understand how things happen in life to them?
Sure. And in this case, so we would say teleological is purpose. And what I like to call is a small t purpose. Like the big T purpose,
That's what
what's going on? The big question is what's going on. But the small t telos would be the idea that as a meaning and sense-making creature, we want to find purpose in something. Well, what was the purpose of that? Especially in an interaction that's mysterious to us, or maybe the affect was negative. Maybe it was a bad encounter with another person, and we want to understand what was. So you use your sense apparatus to take in the information, then you try to derive meaning from that. So we're going into kind of cognitive science for a second here, trying to make meaning out of what your senses brought to you, which is maybe if there was a toxic person and you had a bad exchange, you're doing meaning making by way of senses, and you're taking on board the language that was used or the physical gesticulations that were used and so forth. And then you want to know what the purpose of that was, and maybe there is no purpose to it, but you want to try to do your best to approximate a purpose to this interaction. It could also be for positive situations. So to understand purpose then is to say, well, first of all, be at peace with the fact that there may not have been a purpose to it. Maybe you could unpack the psychology going on there, and the person that was let's just keep with the negative example that was being mean, being toxic, that they have a psychological history. They have a history that brought them to where they are. They're probably projecting, reenacting, and they're maybe a little tinge of narcissism going on there as a defensive mechanism to why they behave the way they did, why they tried to manipulate you or play games with you or just be mean to you. Is a wounded person that has a defensive veneer that is acting the way it does. And again, they might call that projection, that they're projecting that trauma back out to you because they're just reenacting that, and it's not cathartic, which is a sad thing. I mean, like if somebody could treat me like crap if I thought they were going to have a breakthrough, right? But I'd take a few on the chin to help somebody. I don't mind that. On there. And then in that you can see, well, the purpose for me then, and this is a small t teleology, the small p purpose, is to say, okay, I have the understanding and awareness of this, and that way I can transcend the experience. I can move beyond the experience with that knowledge of saying, I didn't have to punch them in the face. I didn't have to shout at them. I didn't have to meet their aggression with my level of aggression, that I could be a little Jedi person and say, no, it's okay. I understand why they're doing this. And that's difficult because when somebody pushes your buttons or triggers you, it's hard to resist the urge. But yeah, as I allegedly get older and a little bit wiser, I say, okay, I understand what this person is doing. And I really I just don't have the energy for that. It's okay. But then that part of me that wants to be righteous and say, well, I want to be the right person, I can say, well, there's no right to this. There is no right to this, and it's okay. And that's my purpose, is to say that I can make it worse by engaging them and meeting them at their level of hostility or aggression, and then get myself upset, and I'll ruminate about it for 2 days until I finally get senile and forget about it. But the idea that maybe I could transcend that experience and just say, I get where they're coming from. It's not right, but it's okay. And I'm not committed to them. They were essentially a stranger. They were not anybody I'm deeply invested in. If I have somebody that I'm deeply invested in, then we have to unpack another kind of purpose and say, oh my gosh, I've entered into a relationship, and maybe that's a Jekyll and Hyde thing, or maybe they have their fits and moods. But then again, I think it's the same calculus. It's the same evaluatory process. It's to say, how committed am I to this person that I don't want to just walk away? What's it worth to me? So there is a purpose there, because your well-being, your affect, your feelings are valuable. And so to protect that is purposeful. You are being purposeful in self-preservation, self-maintaining, insisting on having a level of well-being or serenity or something to yourself that's of value to you. So we can bring value on board, and value helps you to lens what might be purposeful in that engagement. So I'll stop there and see.
That's so interesting. I mean, I just thought of a whole new thing here of like deconstructing people. And I think one thing my granddad would always say, but that I've kind of lived by, is always give people the benefit of the doubt. So it's like, don't think that their intentions are bad. But for example, when you're in a relationship versus like a conflict in a relationship versus conflict with a friend, you have to kind of deconstruct people in different ways. So if it is a relationship, you might have to really deconstruct that person because you want to stay together, whether it's a friend or a stranger. You're kind of deconstructing them on just like a quick psychological level. They might have this, they might be a bit narcissistic. But then I guess you're always having to be the bigger person, which can be hard sometimes. But I think did you think that it's for your own peace that you have to live by the fact that you should always be the bigger person?
Yeah. I think when we're doing this evaluation and we are sense making the situation,
Yeah.
that if we have this kind of core constituency of value for ourselves, so again, purpose and value could almost be intertwined here, that my values are such that I wish to be unflappable in a situation. I wish not to be perturbed or have my balance upset. That when I engage with that fool, that jerk that comes along or whatever, that it may require some interaction. It may require me to meet them at some level, but inside, it's an inviolate state. You know, there's no way to violate this sort of set of values you have for yourself. A lot of times we put pride and our egoic self into how we do the calculus, how we understand where we're meeting this person. So we feel righteous. We say, well, I want to vindicate myself. I want to get the last word. I want to make sure that this person knows I took care of them, or now everybody wants to win or own, and that's that okay. But the satisfaction you get from that is it's shallow. It's just there's no value to it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it speaks to your ego. It speaks to this, who's being satisfied here? And that goes back to selfness and beingness. So let's open beingness up just a little bit more. And there's this core essence to you, this core set of values to you that should be, I'll use a big word, sacred to you. What is valuable to me? So in other words, let's flip it and say, when you're going out in the world, what is your agenda? I don't want to be violated. I don't want to be taken advantage of. I don't want to have somebody hustle me or hurt my feelings, or if I care, or let's go back into interpersonal relationships. If I am attracted to somebody and we're courting and we're, kind of testing each other out to see if we might relate in a deeper sense, that if something shows up that's a red flag, then you're like, but then you might talk yourself out of it. And so there's all these different ways of analyzing the situation to say, again, based on your core values, what's in it for me? What is essential to my well-being? And if this person doesn't tick those boxes, let's move on. And even again, if it's a random person you meet and it's a short interaction, that's easy to do. You can tear away, as long as you don't want to be vindicated and you want to be that righteous warrior type. Let that go. But again, if it's somebody that, let's say you went out on 2 or 3 dates with them, we'll use romantic stuff for a second here. Oh, you went out on a couple of dates with them. You're attracted to them. You think, wow, they got some things going for them, but there was this one thing they said or did, and that may be. Let's use narcissist again. It may be that they're laying out some candy for you, some little things to lure you in, and your intuitive self is saying, no. And so listen to that part of yourself, because you do have those core values, and it's hard to do. But if you keep seeing little red flags show up, then you can just keep, in other words, if you're in good communication with that beingness of yourself, that deeper sense of yourself, that you should be able to navigate that experience. And even if they're attractive and there's somebody you really, they're successful, attractive, doing all these wonderful things that you think you want, that if there are those little red flags, it could turn into huge problems for you if you really commit to that person or commit to a relationship that would just make your life utterly miserable. Then to have that forecasting ability to say, well, what are my core values here? And would they start to be treaded upon by this person if that were the case? And then you just, make the judgment call and move on if you need to, or keep trying a little bit more if you want, but just know that you're looking for things. You're salience tagging here at this point, which means things that stand out to you, you're going to make note of it so that you protect yourself. Because I think at the end of the day, it ultimately comes down to a kind of virtuous self-regulation and self-perpetuation, I guess, in a way, not the physical self, but perpetuating your emotional, psycho-emotional self in a good way, that you want to carry on, continuing to be the person that you love and care for and want to live a good life. It's almost like you're dividing yourself up.
That's really made me think, because I think that includes so many layers. It includes so much introspection, so much self-reflection. As you said, you have to be at a level, a kind of deeper level and understanding of yourself to even have those core values, and it's about getting there. And I don't think a lot of people know how to get there and how to have that deeper sense of understanding of themselves, to have those core values to live by. And then essentially when you do get there, you are just living at your highest potential and at your full self, because you're living by those values. How would you say people can get there? And obviously there's mindfulness and there's introspection and things like that. I mean, there's nothing that I've practiced before, and I'd love to create more core values that I'd live by.
I had a podcast on earlier today. The host asked him how he would define love, because they're defining love they were talking about love in this conversation, not as a feeling, an emotion, or an affect, but love as a kind of process. And he said, well, and I'm paraphrasing him, I'm probably going to get it wrong, but he basically said is making yourself vulnerable to know another. And I thought, wow, that's a really nice way to really drill down on what love is making yourself vulnerable to know another. And the other could be a situation. It could be a group of people, or it could be that intimate person in your life, or a family member that you want to stay in love with. And I agree. I think love can be an emotion, but I think love as an emotion is a byproduct of that trusting process, of that relational process. To the idea, like, how can we be in touch with ourselves enough to know what is good for us, and how to use an evaluative system of ideas and maybe beliefs and concepts to fortify ourselves or arm ourselves in a way that we have that sense-making capability, and we have the salience mapping, if you will, like what's relevant, what stands out to us. I would say that one tool that we could bring out as a suggestion for people is to understand. We talked about being and we talked about self, but there are abstracted layers of self. There could be multiple iterative layers of self. It's almost recursive, not deeply recursive, because we only have so much capacity mentally to do this. But there are kind of postmodern. I don't want to say that. There are thinkers in contemporary thinkers, today's philosophers, let's say the last 50 years, who are talking about this idea, and it's mostly in media, systems complexity, things like that, media studies, and they talk about the idea of curation of a profile of a self. It's showing up a lot now that we have a lot of social media, and so there is the Instagram Justin, there is the Facebook Justin, there's the YouTube Justin. I'm in my 50s, so I'm not on TikTok or anything like that.
Way.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care to go on TikTok myself. No. I do have, but that's such an ADD. It's such an ADD platform. It should be perfect for me. Like 30-second little things I could just spend all day consuming.
They say
little.
You can get into TikTok holes where you can't put the phone down.
I don't know why I haven't fallen down there, but anyway.
Oh my God.
So these guys, and there's people like Nicolas Lohmann, and you can hit pause and write that. Nicolas Lohmann, Marshall McLuhan, Guy Debord is a French thinker, and they were all talking about this idea of a profilicity generation. So we generate a profile of ourselves. It's very literal in the sense that you create an avatar. Let's just pick on Instagram for a moment. You pick an avatar, you pick a photo of yourself or something that represents you. Then in your Instagram identity, you are curating perhaps an idealized sense of yourself, perhaps a self that you want to present to the world that may or may not be authentic, but like we're being fairly authentic with ourselves right now. You and I are just being real, if you will, in this conversation. Yeah. But in that Instagram world or Facebook world, it's very easy through the usage of memes and little snippets of videos of you having a wonderful time. This is my wonderful life. This is how beautiful I am. These are all the fun things that I'm doing. And again, I think that's something that shows up maybe on TikTok, and you see all these people wonderful, and they're influencers and they're having these wonderful experiences and yada, yada, yada. But really, they're not showing you the entire picture. It's just one little piece of an image that the aperture is very closed on. And so this is a cautionary tale that we can generate this prophilic self to present ourselves to the world, almost like an actor goes into method and becomes a character for a movie or a play. And it's so convincing when we see so-and-so up on the screen or the stage, and they're doing this and that, and it's easy to get lost in that, both as the person acting and as the person viewing the display. And there have been actors in the past that get affected psychologically by embodying a character. One instance that
Jeffrey Dahmer was one that apparently he was not feeling well after he
I
was
can
actually nabbed.
imagine having to
And it's
portray that.
actually
Yeah.
really sad, that, isn't it? Because they completely internalize.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be psychically disturbing.
Yeah.
When I use psychic, I mean the psyche, the mind.
Yeah.
It can disturb your psychology. Same thing with, I know Val Kilmer was a good example when the movie The Doors came out. I think Oliver Stone, that
Right.
was 30 years ago. But yeah, he was tweaked by that a little bit. So
Mm.
so it's just another example of what prophilicity can do, and this in the sense that we may get lost in ourselves. And there's another sort of postmodern theory that showed up in the movie The Matrix, and the Wishtonowski sisters kind of, Baudrillard didn't really approve of what they did, but it speaks to that in a little way, where you're kind of living in a simulation, but maybe you know it, maybe you don't know it. But what's interesting is in that theme that they were trying to convey in the movie about, there's reality and then there's this sort of lived out reality. And then, of course, in The Matrix, it's not fair to analogize what we're talking about here because it was a plugged in system. It was all ones and zeros and all that kind of thing. But this is kind of a metaphor that works too, that Baudrillard was speaking of something called the simulacra, which is a copy without an original, which sounds really weird, but that I think we can become simulacra in a sense that when we create this profile self of ours, that it's not based on an original. So in other words, this new entity, like, okay, I'll use myself as an example. And I'm Justin. I go on to, not that this is possible, but I'll go on to Instagram and suddenly I'm an influencer. Suddenly I'm fabulous. Suddenly I'm handsome. All these wonderful things going on, blah, 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 blah. But I created that character. Like, I'm not that. But so there's no original to it. It's just, it is its own agency. It's its own entity. And that's what Baudrillard was talking about with the simulacra, that it is a entity unto itself, or in this case, a persona unto itself, but it has no original. And that can be kind of weird in a way when it comes to us trying to understand who we are and understanding ourselves. Not so much for my generation. I was very fortunate that I grew up when the highest tech we had back in the 70s was pocket calculators. There were no computers, there was no internet. I'm very fortunate in that regard. But I'd say anybody under 40 to 30 is in that age of transition where you had available to you all of this tech, all of this means to going into simulated realities like the social media ecosystem. And in that we have to be very careful and very guarded. There's a lot of wonderful things that can happen from it, but there's also a lot of pathologies that can arise and collect it. So we'll go back to the prophilic self, that when we want to know ourselves and we want to understand how we can be authentic and how we can ensure that our beingness is inviolate. And I would say that we need to try to understand who we are as we present ourselves to the world, and then who we are when we're all alone in a room, nobody around except the inner narrative. And what is that inner narrative? Does it stray off to that prophilic self? Does it go to that character that you created? And is that character more in control of what you are thinking internally at that moment? Or is it the real you? And is the real you living that fast and fabulous life that the character is living? And if there's a disparity there, be aware of it. There's no harm. There's no judgment in it. Just be aware of any disparities that might exist there. That's just one way of sort of doing a clearing of understanding, well, who am I? I'm kind of lost. And what are my values? Where am I? So that, like, it's in its own right as a meditation or a mindfulness practice. It is to go within. It is to go into an inner awareness and to say, gosh, what are the constituents of my selfness that is not something that I curated for the consumption of others? You almost become a media product. And that's what the media theorists talk about when they talk about prophilic, is that you're branding yourself, you're a commodity at that point. And of course, the platforms take advantage of that. TikTok takes advantage of that, or Instagram or Facebook or Meta or whatever they are. So, and again, there's no judgment in that. We all do it. And we would do that without computers. We would do that in real life when we go up to social scenes, like back in my day when there were no interwebs or any of that. We'd go to bars or we'd go to clubs and we'd hang out, and then we'd present ourselves. This is the me that is at the club, and I'm going to tell you about my fabulous life, but when I get home, I'm going to be like, oh, my life sucks. But at the club, I'm really great, because maybe I'm looking for a mate, maybe I'm looking for that person that I want to attract. I don't want to show them my ugly self. I want to show them the beautiful me. And then maybe 6 months down the road, maybe I could start to see some of the stuff that's not so pretty, right? And that's why I said it a little while ago, like when you're courting somebody, when you're in your first few dates and little flags come up, just know that there is that other person there. If they're good at being a dater, right, they're going to show up well, So anyway.
Important to remember that. So important to remember that, definitely. And is there supposed to be like a disparity between the way that you present yourself outside. So let's say when you are in a bar or on social media to your authentic self, because I think obviously social media, to an extent, I don't know how, if it allows you to reach that authentic self, but is it supposed to be the same? Or do you think as humans, we are meant to have those two different sides, and where it's our authentic self and we're completely by ourselves versus, what the world sees?
I think if we were truly ourselves all the time, that it would be a strange world, I think. It's like those, you'll see some comedy shows, well, sometimes like the honest person who just says, what they think. And it's like, that dress sucks. And what the hell's wrong with, why did you say, we have to filter, and we have to, part of the social contract, normatives of social behavior. Normative is a standard. It is what ethically in line in a social context is kind of a description of normative, is to be pleasant when we're trying to be our better selves in a social context, that, we show up as our better self. Because again, it would be a different world if all of our stuff was hung out fresh right there for everyone to see, the traumas, the dramas, the things that, make us sad and all that, and keep us in negative affect states. It's deeply valuable, especially for self-maintenance, self-improvement, if you will, to understand that, we do have to act on a stage most of the time. But when we get back into our home environment and we are, again, in that walk in the woods, or we're in our chair meditating, where we're just not, deeply engaged in life and interaction, that we show up as ourselves. Much like if you're doing repair on any mechanical thing that needs maintenance time, like a jet plane, a commercial jet, after 20,000 hours in the air, they have to bring it down, take everything apart, clean it, It's the same thing with us.
For us.
And I don't want to mechanize us, but I also want to know that we have to detoxify. There's also the other, to bring more metaphors in, is to say that, when we sleep, our bodies and our brains are cleaning out all the metabolites and all the things from the day, and detoxifying from the day. And literally in the brain, there are, it's a cerebral spinal fluid that just goes through and washes your brain out and takes all the brain. Yeah, that's what happens sometimes with dementia, is the plaques, the amygdaloid plaques that build up in our brains, is the brain actually gets washed out by cerebral spinal fluid every night. This is why they say you want to have those good 7 or 8 hours of sleep, which is a joke in my world. But just this whole idea of just detoxing the body and cleaning it out, it's catharsis. That literally means cleaning. And we have that cathartic moment. We have that moment of release. We can cry if we want. We can be vulnerable. If you have a trusted partner, the trusted friend that can share that with you and help pull that out of you, that's great. But however you do it, know that may be an essential part to your hygiene, your emotional hygiene, your psychosocial hygiene, so that you can show up as a healthy person to your social interactions.
I love that idea. I love that idea of emotional hygiene and all that stuff. And I think it's really important, following on from what you said, is having clear routines of how you can cleanse yourself. Yogi was talking about the importance of showering before bed because it cleanses you of the day. But the night shower just is cleansing, really cleansing, and I feel really good after. So it's about finding those different ways of just detoxing. And everyone's going to have their own ways,
Yeah. And that's an important place to pin a point here, and that is that there's a guy I follow. He calls it an ecology of practices. It is that you have multiple means of the cleansing, of the exercising, of the maintenance of self. So that is very important, is to have an ecology of practices. So it could be mindfulness, it could be walking in the park, it could be Tai Chi or Qigong, yoga, Pilates, any kind of physical exercise. There's multiple ways. So the ecology of practices might be one of the more important takeaways of this conversation, is to have a system in place that helps you to heal, rehabilitate, to cleanse, and to fortify, and to be stronger.
I want to talk about Adler's theory. And you touched on it when we last spoke, and I did a bit of research on him, and he was really interesting. The Adlerian theory, he developed the first holistic theory of personality. So he believed that we all have one basic desire, kind of goal, which is to belong and to feel significant. So him and Freud had different kind of views of things. So he emphasized the importance of feeling belonging. There's 5 different things, like relationships, families, and things like that. And that if you feel belonging in all of those things and you've reached your higher self, essentially, and it's about making sure that there's security, in each of those steps to reach a level of happiness and understanding and belonging in yourself.
I can probably bring other ideas on to complement that. And
Yeah.
so we're talking maybe about relationality with others.
Yeah.
And in that relationality, it is again, a fortification of maybe a greater expression of the selfness
Yeah.
of not the
Sense of
beingness
self.
necessarily, but there is a relation in the beingness and the selfness.
Mm.
So, what I would suggest is that this is some work that people that I follow, is that everything is relational. I challenge the listener to come up with one thing that is in a vacuum, which idea would immediately be relational, because where did that idea come from? And how was it generated? Was it generated by information from other people, or did it spontaneously arise in your own mind? In which case, there's you could go reductionist and say, well, it was a communication of various neurons based on past experience that allowed that formulation. So basically, if you want to understand the idea that everything is relations, and that's scale invariant. It's whether it's the universe itself or whether it's little tiny things going on in our biological systems that are our bodies. It's all relating, and it's all based on communication. And that communication is explicit and implicit. It's numerous modes or phases of communication that are going on. Well, why do I say all this? Well, if we want to understand our fittedness or our fitting into the world, is that if we can see ourselves as relational creatures rather than individual, discrete, standalone persons, and then that helps with, again, the sense making and the ability to build a better sense of self and a better understanding of self. You and I are in a conversation together. I am going to be forever affected by what you said. Our conversation today forms new networks or cognitive networks. Like, we're understanding new ideas just by the two of us talking, and that's all relational. And so if we can just kind of, it's a shift of perspective from maybe a current model where I'm a standalone unit. I'm just accumulating ideas, and but if you expand it out a little bit more, that it gives you a greater appreciation for the need, the dependence, the interdependency of relationships and relating to other people.
Definitely, that's really interesting. Yeah. So when we touched on you are able to control the next psychological state that you're in, and having that control of your life and your surroundings and what happens to you, do you kind of believe that everything happens for a reason? Because I remember speaking to someone and she said she doesn't believe that everything happens for a reason. She believes that you can make up a reason for everything, which I found quite interesting. Kind of teleological approach that everything has a purpose and everything serves for a purpose, and it's all relational.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with your other guest,
Okay.
that we reason. There's like reason genesis, like we generate a reason for something, which is, again,
Yeah.
is part of that sense making and purpose evaluative process. I would say that there is not a reason for everything, but the reason is salient to us in the interaction, in the completion of an occasion. If an occasion occurs, which is an interaction or a relation, that we would then see a reason for ourselves. It could be deceptive. We could be self-deceptive in that. So let's say somebody is attracted to somebody who's not attracted to them, and they read into the language of the communication, and they just build up this confabulated story in their mind that person really is attracted to them, but there maybe isn't an attraction. So it could be derailed or hijacked in a way. But to go to a deeper sense of reason, I would say that this is me, this is speculation, and I go to that ontological agnosticism, that I don't think there is a great purpose or a great reason to anything. And that's not to invoke nihilism. It is to say that everything is spontaneous. Everything is generating moment by moment by moment, at least at our scale where we are in the universe, is that everything is happening frame by frame by frame, and it is very spontaneous. I would say maybe I could give a little bit of a pressure valve to the idea that it's meaningless, because that there are probabilistic scenarios in the collapsing of each present moment. And I'm not talking about physics like quantum collapsing. I'm just talking about events and interactions collapsing into a reified reality. So like us having this conversation, second by second by second, things are taking off. None of it's scripted. None of it is planned. There is no supervening force from on high that is coming down and dictating to Justin what Justin will say or Ayah is going to say to Justin. I think it is all very spontaneous. And that to me is very beautiful. I think that's a better way of looking at it than saying that there is this, again, intervening, intercessional, or supervening, for big fancy words, but this thing that imposes upon the actors or the characters that are the little humans that are scurrying about the planet and doing their things, that we can embrace that spontaneity and say that it is all a very creative force, but it's created frame by frame by frame by frame by femtosecond by femtosecond, as this reality collapses into its order from probability. And probability is fascinating when you think about it. Like I'll invoke Greek philosophy that Plato and some of his contemporaries were talking about the forms, the templates, and Jung. We were let's bring Jung into the Adler Freud trilogy. That Jung talked about the archetypal ideas, and there's another philosopher named Whitehead that had eternal objects, and so they're all pointing to this idea that in probabilistic collapse that there are these potentials. There are potentials that exist in a very short term. So it's highly probable that you and I are going to converse for a few more minutes, and then highly probable that the conversation will end. But there's very obscure probabilities about what's going to happen 3 months from now, due to the deep complexity of all the spontaneous events occurring. So I think in the moment, in the singularity of nowness, that we can generate, as your other guest had said, a reason that we can understand, and that's sense making. And I think that's essential. So it's not trivial. It's not to be dismissed that it is very real, but that we have to acknowledge that we are essentially the progenitors or the creators of what's going on. And I don't mean that in the deepest reality sense. It's just as we behave, as we create events by our actions.
And I just got 2 questions that I want to end on. Okay. The first one would be, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, gosh. I would say take life, be more in love with life and not so focused on rat race things. We used to call it the rat race. I don't know if they still call it that now, but it's
definitely do,
yeah, it's the hamster wheel of succeed, work yourself to death, all that kind of thing. And really, if I could speak to people in their 20s right now, revision that, reimagine that. We can keep our market systems, we can keep a lot of what we have in place, but don't do what my generation, every generation did before you. I mean, it's a huge gravity, a huge momentum behind it. But do what you can to live a life of balance, where you can provide the material comfort for yourself, but also have a life that you'll remember when you're about to pass away. If you're fortunate enough to do a life review, some people talk about that when they're about to die or whatever. They, oh, my life flash. Make sure there's memories there. And make sure they're real. They're not something you watched on an app or on your phone. Make sure they're the woods, the ocean, people face to face, real folks, if you can do that. And I mean, just enrich your life. And I actually had a fairly reasonable balance. I was kind of a workaholic. I owned several businesses and I worked all the time, but I also enjoyed what I did. So I managed to find some kind of balance there. But I think that's what I'd say to my younger self is take life in a full sense, not just work, sleep, work, sleep.
That is beautiful. That's a really, really nice note to end off. Thank you, Justin.
Ayah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate the space you created for the two of us, and I hope that the audience benefits from it. That they get some good takeaways from what you and I did. So.
100%. And where can people reach out to you? What platforms, links, emails?
Yeah. Okay. I'd say the first thing to look for is my show that I do, and it's called IdeaCast Interview Series. It's only on YouTube, although I'm probably going to move over to like Spotify or Apple. I have like 112 shows, so it's going to take a while. But
that's amazing.
Yeah. So in doing that and going to that YouTube channel, IdeaCast Interview Series, there's in that informational area, there's also ways to access how they can find me. And again, anything you heard in the show, if you want to reach out and ask me a question about it, you're welcome to do that. I love passing good thinkers and good ideas along to people so that they can benefit. So
amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful.
As we end every episode of Soul Mission, everyone needs to remember that their mission is a powerful force of good in the world and their mission matters. So until we speak again, thank you so much, Justin, for being on Soul Mission Podcast, being part of this journey. I really appreciate it.
I'm grateful to be here. So thank you.
And peace, love and happiness, soldiers.
Amen.
Amen.